Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Hadar Susskind. I'm the president and CEO of New Jewish Narrative. We are here today to discuss a fascinating piece of our work, which is the World Zionist Congress elections. And I know some of you probably have never really heard of that. Some of you have maybe heard of it, but it brings forward visions of Herzl or maybe, all the way into the 20th century to Ben-Gurion. But it is in fact still a really important activity, a really important entity that, while somewhat obscure, at least to most of us here in this country, has real impact and real meaning and real import. And so there's a lot of reasons that we put our time and energy into this. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by two friends, two colleagues, Nomi Colton-Max, who is co-chair of New Jewish Narrative, and another of our board members, Ken Bob, who, along with being on our board, is also, Ken, help me here, a member of the executive of the Jewish Agency. Is that the right title? There we go. We'll get into some of those details again in a little bit. And we're here today to tell you about this upcoming election, to talk to you about our participation, most importantly, to talk to you about, hopefully, your participation, and to explain to you what this is, how it works, answer those questions, and help everybody get a broader understanding of why this is so impactful and why this is so important. So with that, I think I'm just going to, again, remind folks to use the Q&A button and turn it over to Nomi. So Nomi, tell us a little bit more about what this is, what's happening right now, and how are we involved?
Sure. Thanks, Hadar, and thanks to everyone. And I'm really glad we're having this webinar today. So you mentioned Herzl, and that's exactly really where this all started. The World Zionist Congress is the democratic assembly of the Jewish people for the last 128 years. Every 5 years, there are elections. In the United States, they have these elections every 5 years, and sometimes in some countries there are negotiations, but there is a representation body that meets to represent the countries, the people of makeup, the Jewish makeup of each of those countries. And we go together and meet and have discussion and work together there. But it's more than just us going to the Congress, which will be held this fall. The World Zionist Congress elections directly impact the flow of more than $1 million of the Jewish people's money annually. $1 million, $1 billion, billion, COVID brain, $1 billion. Every vote determines how these funds are spent, impacting funding choices and policy decisions for the World Zionist Organization. Additionally, its makeup helps determine its leadership, like you just heard about Ken at the Jewish Agency. It's impacting regulations and budget allocations. And New Jewish Narrative is leading the Hatikvah Slate with our close friends and colleagues from Partners for Progressive Israel. We both fight for progressive values in Israel, and where we hold these positions also at the American Zionist Movement here. And in addition, we are joined by so many of our partners on this slate. But why is it so important that we're together? Well, this year there are 21 slates, Ain't Jewish Democracy Grand, vying to be in this Congress. So we work together to increase our impact. We partner to make sure that our voice, our votes matter. And we are the only slate whose platform aligns with the values of the New Jewish Narrative and our other progressive partners, including J Street, National Council of Jewish Women, Truah, Reconstructing Judaism, Aleph, the New York Jewish Agenda, the Jewish Labor Committee, the two youth movements of Habonim Dror, our New Jewish Narrative partner, and Hashomeret Tzair, and an Israeli group of progressive activists named Israel Shelanu, Our Israel, who partner with the Jewish Narrative, and the three of us work together at the American Zionist Movement and continue this fight to each and every day. In addition, the Hatikvah Slate, which is an amazing group of people, which we will discuss, includes rabbis, social and environmental activists, academics, artists, and others who have come together to best represent our vision for a progressive Israel and world Jewry. What that means is we're the only slate that's anti-occupation and anti-annexation. And since the Jewish National Fund, the World Jewish National Fund, is part of how this impacts at the WZO, which Ken will talk about shortly, this means that they're working on both sides of the green line. So being at the table matters. Our vote matters because it impacts that change. We're demanding that the citizens of the state of Israel must be treated equally, all of them, not just Jewish citizens, but Israeli Palestinians, Bedouin, Druze, and Jews of color, and their civil and human rights must be protected. Zionism, gender rights, LGBTQ plus freedom, racial and economic justice, they're all inextricably intertwined.
Great, thanks, Nomi. Before I go to Ken, one basic fact that we should throw out there, just to share with folks, when does this start? What's the timing?
Great question, Hadar. So we're working hard right now. We're kind of getting the message out, and the campaign starts, as I like to say, just before Purim, March 10th, and ends just after Yom HaAtzmaut, which is May 4th. You get to vote that whole time. The American Zionist Movement runs these elections, but they're run by an independent body, an independent agency that also runs, by the way, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame election. So, there's your fun trivia fact for today. It costs $5 to vote, but that money goes just to pay the costs for Votum. And I like to look at it that those $5 equal $1 billion for each year that we're talking about in this election. And when you think about it, that's really nothing at all.
Right, your $5 can impact $5 billion. It's a pretty good ratio. And also, evidently, there's like a Beastie Boys mix in here somewhere as well. But all right, with that, Ken, I want to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more. I mean, Nomi really set the stage there, sort of what this is, how it functions on the base level. And we just threw out some of the numbers, the $5 billion. But talk a little bit more tachlis here. Like, what does this actually mean? What does this actually impact? Again, for us in the American Jewish community, so many people are involved in so many different groups and organizations and things, and yet this is a piece that doesn't get a lot of attention. The World Zionist Organization, the Congress elections. Why should people do this? Why do we care about this? What does this actually impact that we care about?
Thank you, Hadar and Nomi, and it's great to be with both of you talking about this today, and welcome to everyone who's tuned in. So I'll start at the high level and then move down. So first of all, the $5 billion, which we're going to talk about a lot over the next few months, is what I call the Jewish people's money. And there's a number of organizations that are under complete or partial control of the WZO, of the World Zionist Organization, and decisions are made all the time about how to allocate those $5 billion. So we're going to play a little bit game here of follow the money. So first of all, this money goes, this money goes to a wide array of different types of projects. It starts, as Nomi said, with the World JNF, and the JNF, using our values as a guide, does some really great things and does some things that we think are awful. And so one thing we can do in this work is make sure the funds that the Jewish National Fund is investing in the region into things that we think is really good. So for instance, rebuilding infrastructure in kibbutzim in the south that were affected by October 7th is something that we'd like that money to be used for. And buying land on the West Bank to expand or set up settlements, we want to push back. And I like to always say that we are really involved in trying to push good programs and block bad ones. And if you think about Israeli politics, this is exactly what we're doing. If you have an interest in Israeli politics and affecting things there, this is the place to be, because we are dealing here with fighting the same right-wing messianic forces that we talk about that are in the Israeli government. They're also on the board of the World JNF. So we need to be there in as large a number as possible to push back against their bad plans and push the funding in the direction we want. So there's one example. There's other examples. These organizations do a tremendous amount of work in the educational field, both in Israel and all over the diaspora. We're here in the United States, and a lot of funds do come here for shlichim to work on campuses, to work with youth movements, emissaries being placed all over in various settings, whether it's on campuses or in schools or in JCCs. We want to be involved in who those shlichim are and what they're tasked to do. and we can do that within these organizations. I just give a couple other little examples. A lot of educational materials goes out. Well, as we all know, how educational materials are framed about Israel, about the conflict, about the occupation, we have real impact. Even the maps themselves that are used. That's an issue that we have focused on here. Well, why not go to the source where the maps are issued out to Jewish educators around the world and make sure that they're following what we think are acceptable boundaries? So I could go on about the educational piece, but I don't want to minimize that because all the organizations we're involved with here are doing that kind of work. What's really important here, Hadar, is that we work in coalition. People will say, well, there's other groups that I see that are involved in this. And the answer is yes, we have to work in coalition to make this work. So we have built a pretty broad liberal democratic coalition to work within the WZO, to work in the World JNF, and to work within the Jewish Agency so that we can push back against the bad and promote the good. And that's, maybe I'll finish with this. If I've said follow the money, I'll move from the screen to the stage. You want to be in the room where it's happening. And so we want to be involved in these organizations, not just once every 5 years at the Congress, as Nomi said, but really be involved in the organizations. To do that, you need to get the votes so you can be in the position to do that. So for instance, I represent the World Labor Zionist groups from all over the world on the executive of the Jewish Agency. And so I am there, and sometimes I think I can block things, sometimes I can't, but I know what's going on, and I can inform our political friends in Israel, the Jewish Agency is doing this, or this is happening over there, because we're there when it's going on. So this is not just a once in 5 years. The votes that we all gather over this election will then send us over the coming 5 years to be involved in these organizations and try to make sure that the right decisions are taken.
Great. Thank you, Ken. And thank you, Nomi, also. I think that's a really helpful sort of beginning and framing for this conversation. We've got a lot of questions coming in, and I'll start getting to those. There's one thing I want to say about this first. And, for those of you who've joined us today, I do not have the depth of experience in this particular space that either Ken nor Nomi do. But I did run this campaign 5 years ago, and I was a delegate for the Congress. I think that's 15 years ago now. So I've been in this space some also. And, there's a baseline question that I asked when I first got involved. And I think a lot of people who are involved in our work and our organizations ask is, I don't like a lot of these groups. I don't like a lot of these organizations. I don't like the frame in which this is being done. Why do some of these organizations even exist anymore when there's a state of Israel, et cetera, which I think are all really perfectly fair and valid questions. But to me, the answer to those is to say, whether you think that there should be a Jewish National Fund. And by the way, to the person who asked the question, yes, when JNF was used, the shorthand that was referring to the Jewish National Fund, you may not think that that organization should exist, and that's a fair point, but it does exist, and it has a very large budget, and that impacts real things and real lives that we care about of people in Israel, people in the occupied territories, people around the world. And so, my answer to that sort of like, I don't like this whole thing, is a very pragmatic one, frankly, which is, well, if you don't like that whole thing, that's fine. But if you walk away to it, we leave all of that power and all of that money and all of that influence firmly in the hands of our political opposition. And so I think it is incredibly important, even if you don't love the framing of this, even if you don't like some of the other actors you have to deal with in this, to say, we are going to, just like you do in any political sphere in the United States, in Israel, or anywhere else, we're going to engage and fight for our values in this.
Right. Hadar, let me add to that. I think one of the things that we're saying a lot is, we don't walk away. We need to engage and produce change. And I think that this is important here. And I think, if we've learned lessons from November, it's that by sitting out because you may not agree with everything, that's not going to help us here. And so, as Ken said, we need to be in the table. We need to be in the table just to make those policy changes, but also for those discussions. So I sit on the expanded executive of the World Zionist Organizations from World Labor as well. And when there was a condescending discussion from a member of the Likud about women and why do we need programs specifically for women, and when he said first there was a program for Gula Cohen, and next thing you know, you're going to tell me there's one for Shulamit Aloni, who was one of the first feminist leaders of our progressive cause, perhaps showing my age, but going back and to the late 80s and 90s, I said, we should all be honored in this room, that many of you can even name who these women leaders and progressive leaders are who have been doing this work and fighting for the causes that we have believed in for so long. And when there's no transparency, and when we're asking for those transparency, and when Ken gave examples about the Jewish Agency, I also give the example, if you were to look around your children's day school or Hebrew or afternoon school and look at posters of how we as Jews are represented at this moment in time, or my first female rabbi was determined to find a flag that had a woman reading Torah for Simchat Torah or holding a Torah. Well, if we're not there and we let particularly this messianic right-wing group cling to power, then those flags change. That progress that we made, it's not just about continuing to make change. It's, as we know, it's about stepping back. And so we need to be there, and we need to make sure that everybody in our broad progressive tent, and I'm using that term because I suggest to everyone that they look at our slate, they look at our website, which is hatikvahslate.net, and see that even there, as we know in our progressive world, we all don't have the same exact goals, but we need to work together in our broad coalitions as well, even within us, to make sure that we can be there and vote together and have this large vote that comes out during this election time.
Thanks, Nomi. So first of all, I just put the website into the chat there, so everyone can just click on that and take a look at that. I want to ask, actually, Nomi, you first, but Ken, please add to this. Talk a little bit more about our slate, but also the issue of the broad coalition. I mean, you both touched on this already, but somebody asked here, is NIF represented? And I'll just answer that one very quickly, which is that NIF had been part of the slate in past years, and they decided not to engage in the whole election this year, which I think is really, and again, I don't speak for NIF, but my understanding is, the way they define themselves as an organization, and as an organization that represents different constituencies and different groups. So while there are many folks who are still involved in NIF and NIF leaders, the organization itself is not involved. And then we got another question that often comes up for people who do know this space a little bit is, ARTSA is the slate representing the reform movement. So, I think it would be helpful for folks to understand a little bit both where we come together and where we partner, but also where the different areas of emphasis are between the Hatikvah Slate and ARTSA. So I don't know, Nomi, you want to start with that? And then maybe Ken add?
I'll start and Ken can join in. First of all, I would say that ARTSA, and as a past president of a conservative synagogue, let me even also say Merkaz, are probably two of our closest partners that we work with at the American Zionist Movement, and when we go to Israel, and speak to them daily in all of our work. As Ken said, we have both our productive work and our defensive work, and in our that's how we do that together. We have to hold these lines. Second of all, I would say that by looking at our slate, and just in terms of NIF, let me also say that if the NIF leadership isn't there for the reasons you said, that doesn't mean that people that aren't involved aren't going to, and we're not urging them to vote for this slate as well. I also want to say it's a confidential vote for everybody who's wondering about that, so that you can go in and you vote online on your phone, actually, and you'll see that. And if you look at our slate and you see that there, as I said, there are rabbis that come from Reconstructing Judaism, that come from, there are graduates of the Reform and the conservative rabbinical colleges that are on our slate. I'm a past president, right? I'm on the slate. There are many past presidents that we see that are on the slates that are involved. We know, I would say at this point, and even if we're talking about kind of the synagogues at the moment, that Israel has been tough over these years. And so many of our synagogues have people on other slates as well. And so, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be supporting them. And if you are somewhere and someone says, look, this is a conservative synagogue, this is a Reform synagogue, why should I be voting for you? My first response is, well, look, your vote is important. I need you to vote. And I need you to vote for one of these slates. That's number one. But number two, I want you to look at the platforms. And if your platform aligns more with us and is more stringent, particularly about occupation, as we're talking about, that you have perhaps less emphasis on a stream of Judaism issue, that may be one of the issues. Look at our platform. There'll be some where we where we're going to say the same, but we are supporting religious Judaism, and we're supporting cultural Judaism. We're supporting humanistic Judaism. We have humanistic Judaism representatives on our slate as well, and Aleph. So it's not just about those streams, right? So that may be the issues that help you identify there, and that's why you want to be there. If you have more experience in the kibbutz movement, perhaps, right, as many of us do here, that would be another reason. So go look and identify and see which speaks to you. But if you're here and you're listening and saying, this may be not for me, then I'm going to say, go vote for one of those other slates too, because I still do not want you to not vote at all. Ken?
Yeah, I'll just very quickly add that we also working in the coalition, not only voting here in the States, but also with Israeli political parties. So that, for instance, you have Israeli political parties that frankly don't really work in the diaspora. What comes to mind is Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party, and you have got Yesh Atid, which is starting to dip their toe in the water in the diaspora, but frankly don't do very much. So what we can do is both build alliances with those Israeli centrist parties, which help us really have impact. Someone asked actually in the Q&A, how can you have impact with the conservative trends of Israel? And that's the beauty of these national Jewish institutions, that they include both Israeli political groups and the diaspora. And the diaspora tends to lead more to the liberal and central side. And that's how we can have success there. I will tell you just from personal experience, working within the Jewish Agency, and just to give you a little bit of a taste here, the Jewish Agency basically is the Israeli political scene, if you will, the diaspora Zionist scene, and then the fundraising organizations. So you have the Jewish Federations of North America sit at the Jewish Agency, and the Keren HaYesod, which is the fundraising arm in every other Jewish country around the world. And so what you have there at the Jewish Agency, and someone asked in the chat also, where does the money come from? And I'll just answer that very quickly because it relates to this point. The Jewish Agency are basically the funds raised from around the world from the Jewish communities to support Israel and Jewish work around the world. So think about that. It's like $400 million annually, okay? And by sitting there, we have impact over how that money is used. And it's raised, that's why I keep calling it the Jewish people's money. And the World JNF is both money raised from Jews around the world, but also the JNF owns 13% of all the land in Israel when they generate revenue. They run parks. I'm sure many of you have been in a JNF park in Israel, and you may have paid an entrance fee. Well, that money goes to their budget. So you have money both generated by revenue and by donations that we can help influence. And that's why we can really have the impact, because yes, we have to deal with the Israeli right-wing people and frankly, right-wing Jews from around the world, but we also have alliances we can build with both Israeli political parties and diaspora groups and the religious streams to, if we all succeed, we can then actually have the majority control of these institutions. And we've had that in the past.
Yeah, and we're going to get into this in a minute, what some of those impacts are and have been, but there are real tachlis, meaningful impacts in terms of when we've had control or when our political opponents have had control. So a couple quick things before I come back, Nomi and Ken, to you. One, again, the website I put in the chat, I also put the link directly to the platform in the chat. So if you want to see it, you can find it there. Again, it's hatikvahslate.net. So those are there and can be found. There were a couple of other just little questions that I want to answer here. So, the question here about there was a question about the $5, both where to go, but somebody asked, can someone offer to pay the $5? Could it come from a rabbi's discretionary fund, for example? So the answer to that is no. Very specifically, no. The money has to be paid by the person voting. This is not surprisingly, been a long-term issue, and there can't be discounts for younger voters or this or that or the other. And the big question there is, what is being done to prevent fraud? The very good question, and maybe Nomi wants to take first crack at answering that.
Well, my first question would be, how long do you have? Because I sit in
Not that long.
the leaguings to answer that. So let me say we try our best on a variety of fronts as well. I understand for some people it can be a lot. Let me back up 1 minute and say, first of all, who can vote, because that will lead into my next question.
Great.
Who can vote is anyone who identifies as Jewish, who resides in the United States. Notice I didn't say is a citizen. I said resides in the United States.
And you said anyone who identifies as Jewish.
And identifies as Jewish and did not vote in the last Israeli election. So if you are an American who
explain why the Israeli election part.
Because then you're double counted, because actually the results of the Israeli election also are part of the World Zionist Congress, as Ken said, when you talked about Kahol Lavan and Yesh Atid, blue and white, and Yesh Atid being there, they have representatives there, so they're coming from Israel. So then it would be a double counting. So that's number one. Number two, if you are an American who lives in Vancouver, for example, you are part of the census of that Jewish community. And so you should be part of that vote. Now, am I going to tell you that that's always easy to stop? Am I going to tell you that every group tries to follow those laws as well as others? I'm not, but we are doing our best, and there have been court cases about fraud many, many times over the last many years. What we do, though, acknowledge is that particularly because we're talking about anybody over 18, if I'm not going to say to my 19-year-old, oh, go vote $5, right? Or they may say, no. But so what you can do is there is 5 people that can be on one credit card that share the same address. Notice I said 5 because some groups may have families that are larger than others. And so we've limited that down as well. So that's also a part of kind of this issue. So we work on fraud in a lot of ways. We work on frauds to see where people live. We try, because we have an outside organization coming, to look into the fraud that a lot of people aren't using one credit card, or 25 people don't come in the same address. We don't ever get who votes from where, but after the last election, we did get a look back at kind of zip codes that had higher voted than others. And sometimes too, we can find some questioning facts there. And that has also led to some court cases.
Right. I'll just add on that quickly, because someone is asking in the chat, you need to be 18 to vote in this election.
You need to be 18 by June 30th.
By June 30th. There you go. 18 by June 30th to vote in the election. Okay.
And also, let me just say one other thing about youth, because I forgot this earlier. Part of the rules of the Zionist Congress are that 25% of delegates need to be between the ages of 18 and 35, and that 40% need to be women, although at the last World Zionist Congress, there were groups on the right who tried to say that wasn't necessary or needed. And also I was told that I should know that religious women work and therefore they can't attend. That has come up multiple times. Apparently they're the only ones that work. That lost, by the way. Our slate is 50% women for the second time, as Hadar did last time, and we are 30% between the ages of 18 and 35.
Excellent. Thank you, Nomi. Okay. So again, there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of, sort of important but detailed things, but I want to back up a minute. Again, we've talked about the process a little bit, who's eligible, how it works, the timing. I think Nomi and Ken have explained broadly the frame and, touched on what this impacts. But I think, Ken, I want to ask you first to maybe give us some really specific examples. Like what are some of the differences that the vote in this has made, enabling our representation in these different bodies? What are things that we've seen, either positives that we've been able to help support and encourage, or, as is often the case, bad things that we've been able to stop?
So first of all, one thing that the Congress has is a sort of a collective bully pulpit. So, and this allows us sometimes to insert ourselves in Israeli politics in interesting ways. So historically, for instance, at one point, this is going back quite a few years, the head of the World JNF, and by the way, he was one of our own at the time. We had someone that we had elected from the sort of center-left coalition to be head of the World JNF, and he had worked out a deal with the government to do some land sales of JNF land that would have basically done away with green spaces within the Green Line. I'm talking about just within Israel proper, and actually, they thought they had a slam dunk to get this past the WZO, because the WZO, by the way, has full governance over the World JNF.
Again, Ken, sorry, WZO being the World Zionist Organization, and the JNF being the Jewish National Fund, for those of you who are not in the alphabet soup.
And actually, we put together a coalition of diaspora representatives and someone on the left of the Israeli political spectrum, and some sort of independent-minded people from other caucuses in the Orthodox circles, and we managed to defeat a proposal about land use in Israel that both Bibi as prime minister and a centrist head of the World JNF supported. And we actually affected land use in Israel and in support of the environmentalists. So there's an example where went under the radar. It didn't go under the radar in Israel. It's headline news in Israel because this was like a cooked deal that was going to end up in large apartment buildings being built on Greenland. So that's one thing. The second example I would use is because the 2020 Zionist Congress was supposed to take place and was the pandemic, they ended up being an extraordinary Congress was held in Israel during the anti-judicial takeover proposals. And so we actually organized, and Nomi was one of the leaders of this, we actually organized a walkout of the Congress to demonstrate in front of the Supreme Court against the judicial takeover, which got headlines in Israel. And our centrist coalition put forward all kinds of resolutions that were basically anti-government resolutions about all the democracy issues, and they all got passed. So the headlines in Israel were diaspora Jewry, slams Israeli government. And it was on the news in Israel. I mean, really, it was headline news that diaspora Jewry opposed the Israeli government because, that's not so common. People on this call are used to being critical of the Israeli government, but getting the Jewish People's Parliament, the World Zionist Organization, to be against the Israeli government was actually quite dramatic. So those are the bully pulpit areas. And then you have other areas, which again are the issue of the land use on the West Bank, where again, we, and this is a little, again, the inside baseball of all this, Hadar, about being in the room. We had one of Labor's representatives as chair of the Finance Committee over the last 4 years. And he has managed in that position to head off all kinds of sneaky attempts to move money around for more land purchase in the West Bank. So there it was sort of the blocking angle. We could block money being used inappropriately because we had the chair of the Finance Committee. So we, of course, I don't want to sugarcoat it because there's articles in Haaretz about this piece of land was bought. Well, anything that's reported there is true, but the ones that we blocked aren't reported. And so there again, we can do what we can do. We do what we can with our positions. Lastly, and this is sort of the, I think, important to mention, the World Zionist Organization works as a wall-to-wall coalition. So the more votes you get, the more departments you get. And it works in an odd situation where it's a lot of what I call silo departments. So if you're from Meretz, or you're from Labor, or you're from Yesh Atid, or you're from Blue and White, and you're the chair of a department, you have a budget, and you can have a lot of flexibility what you do with that budget in terms of programming. You have to use it for programming, obviously, but you can decide what you want to do. So for instance, in one of the departments that a Hatikvah person ran, they set up a humanistic Judaism unit to work with people all over the world, mostly young people, frankly, who are looking for new ways of being progressive and Jewish around the world. Another one of our departments set up a unit for LGBTQ and actually has been very supportive of groups in this country, progressives in this country who want to be progressive and pro-Israel and our LGBTQ. So there's examples where we actually took real money and put it into real programs that we believed in. So both the big things and the small things, you can really have some outcomes.
Great. Thank you, Ken. Okay, I'm going to actually read off two totally different questions. And Ken, I want you to answer the short one first, and then Nomi, I'm going to come to you, I think, for the bigger one a little bit. You were talking about the votes and needing the total number, and Nomi said earlier we want to make sure everybody votes. So give people a little bit of a sense of scale. Like, how many votes are we talking about total in this, last time around? And, maybe tell people a little bit, because I think it is illustrative, our experience from the last two elections, both in terms of the total number of votes and the number of seats and what that means.
Okay, so I'll start with the numbers. It's really an interesting question for, I think, those joining us today who don't have a lot of experience. Um, so 2 elections ago, that would be 2015, around a little bit less than 70,000 people voted. Okay, and we got 8 delegates. We earned 8 delegates with around 3,300 votes. It's important to hear the numbers because those of you following here will think, well, I know that many people who should vote for this. Then fast forward to 2020. As you heard, Hadar was our campaign manager. We, I think, put a lot of energy into the kind of coalition building within Hatikvah that Nomi explained, and we managed to increase our vote by 250%, which is a nice jump in any election you're working on from election to election. But 120 some odd thousand people voted overall. So our 250% increase was just incremental. So we earned 10 delegates. And for everyone to get the context here, there's 152 total delegates from America. And the groups that do the best, and this is not going to surprise anybody, are the religious streams. I always like to say that's where you have Jews in the pews. You can go to your synagogue and say, everyone vote. And if you're a Reform synagogue, you can have them vote right there, even if it's Shabbat. So that's pretty good deal. So the religious streams tend to dominate the election in general, but we went up 250% in the last election. So that's sort of what you get to. So one of the questions that people will ask, I'm sure, is, so how many votes do you need to get a delegate? So last time it was around 800. The time before that, it was like 300. And now people are expecting, there's a lot of interest in this election. Everyone understands they got to step up their game because it was so much more popular last time. So people expect to go up even more this time. So the stakes are higher. And for us to try to double our vote again or even better, we really need to have a great get out the vote effort.
Excellent. Thanks, Ken. All right, Nomi, there was a question in here going back to the platform and what Hatikvah stands for. The question specifically was, is it talk about, sorry, now I lost it. There we go. About, Jewish movements that have kept on the periphery of Jewish life like Ethiopians. This is the question I'm reading off. And it says, does the Hatikvah platform include a plank focused on inclusivity? So why don't you answer that, but also dig in a little bit more to what's in the platform and why? Why are we leading with these values and these policies?
Sure. So as I opened with, our slate is definitely about that. And even on the first page, it talks about social equality, gender rights, LGBTQ plus equality, on racial and economic justice for all. What I didn't say when I talked about the slate members, and forgive me, is that it is also not an Ashkenazi normative slate. And that there are Jews of color, there are Jews of Ethiopian origin, and other Jews of color that are also on the slate. There are Jews that come from everywhere and all walks of life and different work, and of course there are LGBTQ plus members of the slate, and we are very proud of that. And for us, the slate needs to represent what American Jewry look like. It should be a mirror into American Jewry, and for sure it should be a mirror into the progressive American Jewry, which I believe at this point in time is the majority of American Jewry here. And so looking at the slate and looking at the people, and shortly you can see now there's underline on some as we're adding bios and pictures of everyone that's on the slate. That should be completed very soon. And so you will get a little 2-3 sentence bio on every member on the slate and a picture of them. And so you will see that everyone's reflective. Again, not everyone on the slate comes even from those organizations that we've talked about. There are other people and other advocates and other social activists who are on the slate who reached out to us and said, we want to be on the slate, or others that an organization may have said, I have people that really want to be on your slate, and how can I get involved? So that's it. And so that's the answer to that. If you look at our slate, first of all, if you go to the platform page, And it says it's a vote for an Israel that lives up to our highest values. We talk about who the people are. We talk about that our vision is based on the Declaration of Independence and properly actualizing that dream, which we all know has not happened. It talks about the democracy movement and how we have worked with them over these last few years, and as Ken talked about at this walkout. It talks about religious and cultural pluralism. It talks about opposing the efforts of the ultra-Orthodox to impose their values on ours. Our values, our Judaism is not less important than their Judaism. Our Judaism is what we make it, and as we are activists and we are progressive Jews, and our voice is just as important as theirs, and we cannot sit down and let that happen. Then, of course, we talk about an end to a war, and of course, at this moment, sadly, there is talk about what's happened on October 7th and how we do need to rebuild and support those communities there. And by communities there, by the way, I don't just mean Jewish communities. I mean the Bedouin communities. I mean mixed cities. I mean towns that need more work. All of this needs to become here, not just cities that perhaps voted Likud, as we know has happened. That's not what we're talking about here. So we talk about reconstruction. We talk about the equality. We also talk about fighting gender-based inequities in all aspects of society. That's also listed there. And we, talk about that all of this programming and all of this $1 billion a year that we're talking about is going to go to foster programming for our people, whether that's our people in communities or on college campuses, or in synagogue life, wherever that is, or in this kind of a cultural setting. This is the programming that we want. And this also means that we, as we know, don't turn our back on people that are questioning this government at this moment. We are all questioning and challenging this government at the moment, and we can't walk away. We can't walk away. And I think if the last week and a half have shown us anything in this country, it's that the importance of our vote. And if you are questioning and angry, then your vote is even more important than it was before.
Thanks.
So that's all listed here too.
Thank you, Nomi. So I want to pick up that energy right there and take it into the next step, which is, what do people do? How do we get involved? What do we do? What's the plan? There's lots of pieces. Again, Nomi talked about the timeline for this. The actual voting begins in March and goes through May. So we've got about 6 weeks still until we hit the actual voting. But there is a lot of work going on, both for us within New Jewish Narrative, but also as the Hatikvah campaign and with all the different colleagues and different partners as part of this slate. So maybe Nomi, you want to pick that up, and then Ken and I will add also
Sure.
about what are we doing to, and not only what are we doing, because I think people do want to hear that, but what can they do?
Right. So what you can do is what I'm going to say first. And the first thing that you can do on the call is go to hatikvahslate.net and join us. By joining us, you will get on our mailing list. You will learn when voting opens. You will learn more about the slate. You will learn how this process works. Then I want you to follow us if you are on social media. If you're on Facebook, Facebook, Instagram, X, Blue Sky, all of the above. Follow us, like our posts. Every time you like our posts, someone else sees our post. And you need to spread that word to all of your people. Wherever you are out, talk about the campaign, talk about the importance to your progressive friends about why we cannot sit this program out. Host a program, host a meeting. That's for sure where we're going at the moment. There are speaking engagements. You're a member of a synagogue and you hear your rabbis talk about their slates. That doesn't mean that they can't support both slates. As I said, we need everyone to vote. So tell them about the slate. Say you'd like to speak about the slate at an event or hold a separate event and invite people that you know there. Talk about it with your kids and your grandparents and your uncles and your aunts and everybody we know to make sure that everybody is talking about it. It's the perfect Shabbat table conversation, from Bubby down to kid, it's the perfect conversation. It can get everybody excited and have this really productive conversation. I have more, but I'll let you guys add some stuff in there too.
Great. Ken, you want to pick up from
Yeah,
there?
real quickly, I do want to emphasize Nomi's what I call retail approach. You know, when you talk about, go for the wholesale is, buying a list, and sending it out and seeing what happens. But all of you talking to family members and friends is really actually important when you're talking about getting 7,000, 8,000 or 10,000 or 12,000 or 15,000 votes. There's actually a small enough number that if everyone who votes also tells someone else and gets a friend or a partner, a spouse, whatever, it really actually makes a difference. So I don't want to minimize, what Nomi is talking about. I think also in terms of what you can do with the campaign and how you can help, not all of you are going to feel comfortable. Well, I can't speak about this, but reach out to us. We'll find you a speaker. One of the diversity issues that Nomi didn't get into is we're pretty spread out, our slate geographically, I mean, so that, we have people all over the country. And likely in where you are, near where you are. So if you can arrange something, whether it's in a synagogue, at a JCC, in your living room, we can usually get someone to come and schmooze. So really, if you have that kind of, you want to do something, one thing I've been telling people is that this is actually something we all can do. We can all kvetch. We're good at that. And we can do another angry post on social media, and we can yell at our TV. We're good at that too. But everybody can do something with this election. And again, we were not terribly successful in our November votes in a lot of cases. So this is another chance. This is an opportunity to more directly impact Israel, perhaps. I know it's not going to bring peace, and it's not going to solve all the social ills of Israel. I have no illusion. This is really, in a lot of ways, I like to say, working in the belly of the whale. But those of us who are willing to go there and do the work and put up with some of the ridiculous conversations and difficult issues sometimes, and get called names, which I have been called. And I know I'm looking at Nomi and Hadar. We've all been called names by people saying, you're not a Zionist, you're anti-Israel, in those settings, I'm saying.
I've been taken to the Zionist Supreme Court for not being a Zionist in the last.
So we're willing to go do the work on the front lines, but we need your help. And so anything you can come up with out of this conversation, when you look on our website and you look at our platform, you look at our slate, we're there to try to help you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you both. I want to add a little bit on that, but before I do that, building on something that you just said and some of the questions in there, about the definition of Zionism, what do we mean to say it's Zionist? We're doing this in the World Zionist Congress. We know that in our broad progressive Jewish community, there are people who identify in a variety of different ways with the term Zionism or not. And, this, as I said at the beginning, the institution is what it is. It is the World Zionist Congress. It's been called that for a long time. That's the framework. That's the function. We can decide whether to engage or not. But both if you look specifically at our platform, and honestly, I think more importantly, if you look at the work of all of the organizations that make up the slate, NJN and our various other colleagues, you will see that these are all groups that support a progressive vision of Israel, as Nomi outlined, right? That support Zionism. To us, somebody asked you, do you have a definition of Zionism? Like, no, but I can tell you what it's not, because there are a lot of people that say, well, if you're a Zionist, that means you support Netanyahu and everything he's doing. And that is not what it means. And that is not what it means to us as part of organizationally, nor as part of the slate. What it means to us is we support the existence of the state. There are a lot of different ways. There are a lot of different, things people want to define that their own way. So I think it's really important. There's also a question about, whether or not the slate supports a two-state solution. I got to be honest, I don't remember off the top of my head if that's in the platform. But the organizations, we and many, many others who are part of it, that is the baseline policy. So in case you were unclear, that is what it means when we say we oppose occupation, right? Ending the occupation means the creation of a Palestinian state. That's what that means. There are a lot of organizations out there that will talk about occupation that don't specifically want to say that, but that is what it means. So look, there are so many different ways to get involved. As Ken and Nomi both said, we get asked all the time about our work. Like, how can we get involved? What can we do? People looking for an opportunity to do a thing. So again, like Ken said, whether it's a gathering, whether it's virtual, whether it's taking the information that you have gotten and will be getting from us and sharing it with friends and families, encouraging other people to get involved. We talked a little bit about synagogues. Again, synagogues often are supporting are supporting Arza, are supporting Merkaz, but some of them are open to having Hatikvah included in those conversations. But it's not just synagogues. It's certainly any Jewish gathering place, but any place you're gathering with Jewish people. You can raise this issue, you can talk to them, you can help explain to them that, if you have kids or grandkids at a Jewish day school, the map that is on the wall in their school is impacted by this. I know because I had that issue at the school my kids used to go to. But all of a sudden, maps showed up that didn't have a green line on it anymore. And that's something that gets impacted by this. If you are involved in American Jewish life or Jewish life in any other country in the world, it is impacted by this. And so what you need to do to be involved, right, is to ultimately to cast that vote, to spend that $5 to cast that vote. But there are ways to go ahead and make sure you're involved. Again, if you are on our organizational list, you'll be hearing from us more. If you want to reach out specifically, if you want more information, if you're interested in hosting an event or doing something, you can email hatikvah@progressiveisrael.org. Again, you can also just reach out to me. I'm going to put that email address into the chat as we speak. Apologies. But again, you can reach out to me. You can write to info@, New Jewish Narrative. We will make sure, and you're going to be hearing from us more and more in emails, in mailings, in calls, in everything else. I'm going to take a breath for that.
I was in an event last night with the director of the Israeli National Rape Crisis Centers. It was an amazing program. And there was a young person there who I was introduced to, and her mom said, "Can you talk to her about Hatikvah and New Jewish Narrative?" And so I told her. And as we're talking, of course, the first thing she said is, "Are you on Instagram?" So great, we were done. One done. Then she kept talking about me, and she said, "So like all of my upset friends in their early 30s who can't find a place, who don't know what to do, who want to make a difference, you're telling me that I can actually make difference here?" And I said, well, first join New Jewish Narrative, of course. But then I said, support and follow. But then I said, do this as well. And she said, this seems so easy. Why aren't I hearing about this? And so that's exactly it. It seems so easy, and yet it's not. And so we need to get this kind of from the, to use a Washington term, outside the beltway here to everyone, to, as Ken said, the Jews in the pews and the parents in a carpool line. And
this is also a spot where DC residents' vote counts, unlike every time. Sorry, keep going.
So, so that's it. We can do this. And we've been having Zooms, and each organization is having Zooms, and we're having Zooms together. And somebody called me and said, what if I want to do an event here? I'd like to do an event in this city. And so we're working on that too. I'm really excited that I'm actually going to be coming to Z3 in Austin to talk about this, to talk about Progressive Zionist Congress and the Slate. So that's huge, because somebody looked and said, there's not really anybody left of center who's speaking. And if we want to make sure that the entire Austin community comes to the event, we need to make sure that somebody's talking to them. So again, everybody is welcome here. If you are questioning, that means we're your home.
I want to add one thing also. I want to emphasize, it's been said a couple times, but I want to emphasize the importance of all the organizations that are part of the Hatikvah Slate. And I know that some of you are on the call who are involved with multiple organizations. That's natural with these calls, and obviously it's wonderful. But any encouragement you can do within your other organizations to be involved is incredibly valuable. That's not because they're not interested. Trust me, we are getting amazing cooperation this year. We really are. So this is not meant in any way to anything negative, but it will always help if a reinforcement goes through, like, hey, I was on NJN's webinar about this. We should do a webinar about it. And trust me, the various talking heads you have on your screen here today will be happy to take this show on the virtual road. So If you need speakers, and all you want to do is insert the idea, and again, we go back to the synagogues. There are independent synagogues who aren't related to one of the streams. They should all be doing a program, and I'm happy for them to invite Hatikvah, Merkaz, and Artza and do a show, and let us talk about it, because we're very collegial. And the message we're putting out there is we want you to vote for Hatikvah because we think it really represents the progressive Israel values that we care so deeply about. But you know what? If you're going to vote Artza or Merkaz, that's part of our coalition. That's good too.
Great. Look, thank you both. And I want to say to everybody, I mean, the most important takeaways to this are, action. Cast your vote, share it with your family, share it with your friends, get involved. Everything Ken was just talking about, everything Nomi was just talking about. But, this election is also happening in a world that is different than it was 5 years ago, right? 5 years ago, when we had this election, okay, people were doing their thing. They're either pro-Israel or they're not, or they're this or they're that. And we know that in our reality now, post-October 7th, the way not only Israeli politics has changed, but the American political discourse around Israel and Palestine and Zionism and the rest of it has all changed, that it is both a challenge and a greater need than ever to define a progressive Zionist space, to say, yes, we care about Israel. Israel is important to us, and we care about human rights, not only for Jews, for Palestinians, and we support two states. And this is a way to actualize that. And so many people who, over these last 15, 16 months now, I've had these conversations with of what does it mean today to say I support Israel, but I oppose what the government's doing, or I oppose the war, or the way the government treats non-Jewish citizens. All of these questions that people have been talking about so much more, and so much more painfully, frankly, over this past year, almost year and a half. You can answer those questions here, right? This is the way to actualize those conversations, to say, I care about Israel, it's important, and I care about justice, and I care about progressive values. So, I just want to leave everyone with that. I want to say, Nomi, Ken, thank you both for this webinar, much more importantly for everything else. And to all of you who've joined us today, thank you. Please do be in touch. Please let us know if you need more information, if you just have questions. Again, you can email me. We put in the chat the other emails for the Hatikvah Slate to reach out to. So that's it. And you'll be hearing more from us. Thanks, everyone.